All right, good afternoon, everyone, in a new episode of I Wish My Boss Told Me That. And this is going to be an epic episode. We have an incredible guest. I'm extremely happy to announce Parmesh Shahani here in our podcast. He is probably. He is probably the most well-known D&I advocate, LGBTQ inclusion advocate in the country, in India. So very, very happy to have you here. He's an author of 2 amazing books, Gay Bombay, 2014, I think, and of course, famous Queeristan. Very recent book. We're going to get this signed, by the way, hopefully today.
I would love that.
And by the way, congratulations on the prizes that you have just won, I think, with this book.
Yeah.
A big recognition here in India with that book. So big
Thank
congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm just really happy to be here. I'm happy to be on location at AB InBev. It's a company I've admired over the past few years, especially since you started working your magic here. And it's incredible. I mean, I'm a big fan. I follow you on LinkedIn. I love the podcast. Many of your team members are friends. And there's a lot of companies that just talk the talk. But I'm really happy that AB InBev is like walking the talk and converting a lot of its intent into action with all the good work that you're doing. So thank you for having me here. It's my pleasure. And I'm here to share my thoughts with you, but also to push you and all of you to continue on this journey and go further. So thank you for having me. I really look forward to our conversation.
Great, me as well. I'm a little bit nervous for this conversation though. But let's start. So maybe we can start with your journey.
Yes.
Your journey since your youth. Maybe when you came out as gay, what were some of the experiences that you had at that moment in time? In the family, but also at work. Right? So what are the type of challenges that you go through as you come out here in India?
Yeah, so I think, coming out is different for everyone. And I think, everyone, straight people also come out in a way, because coming out is this term that people used for, mostly in queer contexts where people share this important part of, who they are attracted to with other people. And I think everyone comes out in some way or the other, but we don't think of it as straight people. So I want to ask you, when did you come out?
I was quite late to come out.
As a straight person.
18.
Yeah, but which is really good. And I hope everyone listening to this realizes that everyone becomes conscious of this at different stages in their life, right? But it's and I think we should have more conversations where straight people as well talk about their own journeys, because I think that would be so rich. In my case, I came out to myself very early on. I mean, I knew as a child growing up that I was emotionally and physically attracted to men, and I was very comfortable with this. I grew up feeling very, very happy and confident of my gay fabulosity. But for me, it was a journey of articulation, because we live in a society which is heteronormative, where everyone kind of expects, as when you're a child, you grow up, like, oh, do you have a girlfriend? And they do all this stuff. So people kind of put you into a hetero box, even though you may not be. So in my mind, I was like, no, I think I'd like to have a boyfriend. But society kind of this. So while I was very comfortable early on, it took me a while to kind of articulate it, express it to myself, be okay with it, and then figure out how to share it with other people. So for most people, coming out, an important coming out journey is when they come out to family. So in my case, I came out also late to my family. I was in my early 20s. I had my first boyfriend, which is when I came out to my mom. And that was interesting because I told my mom, it was in the evening, and I said, Mom, I think I'm gay. And she was like, without missing a beat, do you think, or are you sure? And I was like, okay, I'm sure I'm gay. And she was like, okay, what should we have for dinner? And that was it, right? And, I'd grown up seeing Bollywood. I'm like Bollywood obsessed. So I'd seen all these Bollywood movies and I thought, mothers swoon and say, "Hey Bhagwan, ye wo," and none of that happened. So I felt quite cheated because like you should be little. She's like, "But what is there to be surprised about, right?" My father did all the drama. With my father, I was in the US. I came out some couple of years later. I was at MIT. I'd organized the South Asian LGBTQ Film Festival, and the BBC wrote about it. And it was on the front page. And Parvez Musharraf was president of Pakistan at that time. So the BBC had, Parvez Musharraf and something in the news, and then below that my photograph saying South Asian gays organize LGBT Film Fest. So our front page was circulating all over the world. And so I had people calling me and saying, "I think it's time you tell your dad," before someone forwards him this page. So I had to call my dad and say, "Look, you're going to read about this in the news. It's on the BBC. It's true." That's how I came out to my dad. It didn't go very well at that time, but he's come around. But I think to everyone else, it's a process. It's, who are you comfortable with? What privilege do you have? How confident are you about if people reject you, will you be okay? Is it safe for you to come out? Straight people often don't go through that, right?
Yeah.
If you come out as straight, if you say I'm straight, people are like, yeah. In most countries in the world, you are not threatened or killed or discriminated against or any of that for something as basic as whom you choose to love. But it's strange that queer people have to go through all of this, which is that coming out for us is a difficult process, fraught with anxiety, and it puts so much burden on us. To answer your question about the workplace, I came out in my earlier jobs. I was not out. In my first few jobs, I was not out, although everyone knew, I think, and which is why after I came out, people were like, "We knew, we were just waiting for you to tell us." But I didn't feel comfortable enough. Before this, I worked at Mahindra. When I came out there, I came out to the managing director first, and I said, "I'm gay." And I was in Boston at that time, and I was like, "If I come to India and work with your company, and if my partner comes with me, will you offer us benefits?" And he was like, "I don't think my company knows about all of this, but we will treat you equally." And I was fine over there. Some years later, when I joined Godrej, I had become more conscious about the fact that my queerness and my fighting for rights is not something personal. It needs to be wider and for my community. And I should stop asking just for personal favors or special treatment. I should really work within systems and structures to ensure that the structures change for everyone. So it can't just be you're making an exception. So the questions I asked Godrej. So when I joined Godrej, I came out before I joined and I said, "Tell me about your policies, processes, and culture that would make me as a gay person want to work with you." At which time Lisa Godrej, who was my boss, and Sumit was head of HR, said, "Let's look up our policies." Realized that there wasn't an anti-discrimination policies and nothing with regard to LGBTQ. And they were like, "Okay, we need to change this." So I came out at Godrej when I joined, and almost immediately we began the process of, kind of transforming Godrej into being more inclusive there. So then it became like a public company-wide coming out journey that the whole company went on.
But it was also a catalyst to the company, basically.
It was a catalyst for the company to make a lot of progress with regard to LGBTQ inclusion, for sure.
That's a bit of a different journey that indeed you go through, right? At work and at home.
Yeah.
And then you, as we just mentioned, you wrote 2 books.
Yeah.
So how did you start that journey? When did you realize, I need to start writing a book and share my experience with the world?
Yeah. So the first book, Gay Bombay, came out of my MIT master's thesis program. And both the books are both are kind of memoirs, and they're also kind of call for change in the world. So at MIT, I was doing a master's in media studies, and the book enabled me to look back at my own sexuality, but also look at how post-liberalization, because of technologies like the internet, online, offline, queer communities were forming all around India. So it was my own autobiography merged with the formative creation of a queer digital community in India. So what spurred that was my academic pursuits, but I also used the book writing. I use book writing as therapy because I also go to therapists often and I give them a lot of money. But I think I've saved so much more money in therapy because I've worked through a lot of my issues while writing. Yeah. So while the first book kind of dealt with this first stage of my life and looking at sexuality and digital, queer, digitally empowered Indian sexuality in this context. And I was in a university while writing it, so it had that audience. Queeristan came in a very different context. I've been working at Godrej, I've been working in corporate India, I had been pushing my own company for change, and I had been pushing other companies through collaborations to become more inclusive. So Queeristan, the context of Queeristan was post the 2018 Supreme Court verdict, which decriminalized homosexuality in our country. I recognized that while there would be a lot of social change that would come from the laws, from various governments, from media, from society at large, all of us in the corporate world would also have an important role to play.
Yeah.
So how do we, because a lot of the questions that I was getting were, tell us about what you did, how you did what you did, what steps can we take? Younger people would especially say, how can we convince our senior leaders to be more inclusive? Senior leaders would say, what are the advantages of being inclusive? Tell me about this. How can we do this? Because, they're dealing with talent, they're dealing with attrition, they're dealing with all of this. So Queeristan came out of this context of saying, post 2018, we are entering in a new India in which being LGBTQ is no longer a crime, but it is far from being equal. How can I write a book that is a template for well-meaning queer allies to kind of go on this journey with us, which also serves as an incredible resource for queer and straight people who want to look back and learn about the history of queer India, how it's embedded in our culture, how so much of our queer identities are linked to this idea of family, the law, the journey of the law, my own personal journey over the past 20 years, and kind of married these journeys along with, a typical business book, which is why and how to, etc.
Yeah, that's what I like about the book. It's a combination of, as you said, a bit of a memoir where you talk about your story, but at the same time, it has a couple of chapters with very concrete tips of what companies can do to become more inclusive.
And references at the end, 200 organizations at the end.
Let's go back in time. First you studied here, then you went to the US to study, but you decided to come back to India to start your career at that time. How was that transition between India, US? In terms of
deciding to come back to India, well, I saw Swades, Shah Rukh Khan Swades. I think Swades has upset a lot of us. For your listeners who were probably too young, I don't know who listens to your podcast, but I'm assuming it would be younger people.
25.
Yeah, so then maybe Swades didn't come out. And it's for us, Swades came on. It's are you a Shah Rukh Khan fan?
Yes, of course.
Okay, good. So, to me, Swades is correct answer. Swades is one of his best films, and in it, he is this NASA engineer who comes back to his hometown and essentially to light a bulb. And it was, soppy and, overtly manipulative and emotionally doing all the things, squeezing you, but a lot of people, I got emotionally squeezed and said, I want to come back. I feel very fortunate to have had the privilege of actually having this education that I've had. And I say privilege because it is a privilege, because it's, it comes about because of set of circumstances. I had access to maybe English education when I was young. My parents put me through certain things because of which I could actually have access to, studying at a place like MIT, albeit on a scholarship and things like that. So when I saw Swades, I felt that I wanted to come back and kind of, be part of the ecosystem here. As an out and proud gay person living, because I was living in Boston during a very interesting time in Boston's queer history. So the 3 years that I was in graduate school is when Massachusetts legalized same-sex marriage. And me and my partner at that time were amongst the throng of people who went out, who were standing outside the courthouse, screaming and waving in joy. So, and Massachusetts in the US was the first state that did this, and then subsequently other states followed and things like that, right? So I came from living in an India in which it was a crime to going and living in Boston where suddenly gay marriage was being legalized. Our home, we rented a home and it took half an hour literally with the owner of the home to put both our names on the agreement. He didn't blink. For insurance policies at MIT, it took us 20 minutes to go to the university, and we were both on his insurance policy. I mean, it was just so easy from living there to coming back to an India in which it was again, so it was interesting. It's been interesting, and we've gone since I've come back. I've gone back and forth between these worlds, and I think it's interesting. I mean, we've gone through our own journey of decriminalization in 2009 to decriminalization in 2013 to decriminalization in 2018. Bus, I think this is it. I hope our courts, don't go the other way now, and we do other progressive things like, an anti-discrimination bill. We improve the Trans Act, which is deeply problematic. I sincerely hope that we do get marriage equality and other things like that, and this journey moves ahead. But for me personally, the journey between the US and it's been one of both. I mean, we've made incredible changes in India as well over the past decade. So my presence here, and I look at these changes, it's incredible. While in the inclusion space, we've seen US and other parts of the world, especially with the Obama victory and then the aftermath that followed. When Obama was elected, people said we are in a post-race world. I mean, LOL, literally, in terms of how that has played out. So, inclusion, diversity and inclusion is something that I think every part of the world is trying to.
It goes ahead, it goes a little bit back.
It goes ahead, it goes back. In the past few years, we've seen in America and other parts of the world, racism rear its ugly head in ways that you would have not imagined a decade ago. So I think it's an ongoing struggle globally of people wanting to live in societies which are, inclusive and equitable. And over the years, I think what I've seen, and which is what unites other parts of the world, is, young people wanting, all fighting together for climate, to prevent climate change the way it's been happening to all. So I think all our struggles, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Me Too, whether it's the anti-caste movement in India, whether it is a movement for LGBTQ rights in India and other parts of the world, all have this common thread of we all just want to live in a world in which we are treated equally. And I think this is something that we would have imagined in 2021, 22 we would have had in the world, but we don't. So I think that's what also unites these experiences.
And where do you see India in the next, let's say, 10 years? No? Because in your book you write about Kyrgyzstan, which is maybe a portrait of
rosy,
India in 10
very
years.
Very optimistic.
Which are the breakthroughs or the changes that you believe India can make or should make in the next couple of years? Because you said, yes, it's decriminalized. However, there's a lot of very obvious benefits or rights that are not even available to LGBTQ.
And there's numbers which are quite disheartening. So if you look at trans, for example, 92% of trans people who are able and willing to work are not getting jobs. So even in India, which is, there is no 377, the actual figure on the ground is very geared toward against, our sexual minorities. It's the same if you look at women, for example, women's participation in the workforce is declining and things like that. So where do I see India? My perspective on life now is radical optimism and empowering infrastructures of change to actually convert some of the radical optimism into reality. So I see India in 10 years. I see us I see all the laws being passed. I see the trans bill being actually modified and being made actually incredible and reflecting the aspirations and realities of our trans citizens. I see comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation. I see marriage equality happening. I see, not things like the NCERT syllabus being changed and then taken back. I see our educational institutions talking about, D&I and talking about, diversity and respecting everyone in our schools, colleges, upwards. I see media change much, much more. And we are seeing all of this happen already, whether it's books, whether it's television, whether it's, OTT platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hotstar, whichever there are not just programs on with queer themes, there are queer people and themes which are being embedded in every program now, whether it's a FOMO Shots Please, whether it's an Arya, whether it's Delhi, name it, there is a queer thread or whatever. So we are seeing some of this happening. So I see a normalization and a much more diverse representation of queer lives, queer desires, queer hopes, queer families in our media across. And most importantly, which is the area in which we work in, I see many more queer people in workplaces.
No.
Because in all of this, I think while the courts have a role to play, while NGOs have a role to play, all these other societal stakeholders have a role to play, we are living in an India and a world which is in neoliberal capitalism. So I think corporations like ours have a role to play, which unfortunately or not is much bigger than it used to, because corporations today can decide directions that in so many cases governments will follow. So I think if we can role model what inclusion looks like in our corporate spaces, which is change our policies, change our culture, actively hire, and I'm talking for LGBTQ, but I mean this for every dimension, actively hire, more queer people in every job position possible. Queer people are 6 to 10% of the population in any case.
Yeah.
There's no reason why every organization should not have as many queer people work. I mean, every organization actually already probably does.
Yes.
But they're not comfortable enough to share aspects of their queer lives with others. So I see an India in which, queer people are flourishing everywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a rosy or too optimistic India, because we've seen in other parts of the world, change happens. Often, it builds up, and before you know it, it's happened.
Yeah.
So, I spent 45 years of my life in an unequal India. My aim is that, I want to die in an equal India. So that's my aim, right? Whenever it happens.
Yeah.
I want to die in an India in which I married my partner, I worked at workplaces which are super inclusive, and my people have the same rights as everyone else.
Let's hope you can live in that India first.
I want to live in that India
time.
too. I mean, sooner rather than later. And I've been eating. Thank you for the apple. I had an apple before this podcast, along with some non-alcoholic beer. So it's a good combination, I think. Fruity. So I'm trying to eat healthy to live longer in that India. But I want sooner rather than later. Right? Yeah.
So let's go back to when you started working with Godrej.
Yeah.
What I loved when you talk about when you start working for Godrej is that you mentioned to Nisa, I think, you were having a conversation with her, and you said, "I'm willing to join you, only if I can start the culture lab."
Yeah.
So and then you talk about it in your book that you spent the whole day discussing this topic with her. So can you take us through what is this culture lab exactly?
So I'm a wheeler and dealer. I do win-win scenarios. So I think that's very, very important. And I call this method itself in the book Jugaad Resistance. We can talk about later as well. But it was very clear that when I was at a point in life, because of the rich experiences that I had before, I had headed a think tank at MIT, I'd done a startup of my own, with youth and India. I'd worked in corporations and edited fashion magazines. I had already worn creative, academic, and business hats. And I was seeing in all of these that, there were amazing conversations that were being had, but by people in silos. So my fashion friends were having amazing conversations, but they were not talking to people outside fashion. My academic friends were having incredible conferences, but people in the business world had no idea. My business friends were doing incredible work, but people in academia or policy, etc., were looking at them with disdain because business people are laughed at and all of that as well. Not y'all, I'm sure y'all are not hashtag not all business people, but it should be hashtag I wish my boss told me that. No. So I was seeing that our country is changing incredibly, but people who are cataloging and this change are sitting in different silos. So the big idea, and then in 2009 I got selected as a TED fellow for the first time, and so I went to my first TED and saw this mishmash of science idea followed by performance, followed by philosophy, followed by agriculture, followed by someone in a space suit. This is weird, trippy experience. And TED in 2009 was very different. It was not a meme or what people do now, right? It was rather unique at that time. So the broad idea was, how do we create a space for conversations like that in India? And I wanted to, so actually when I had met Nisa, I dropped out of a PhD program and I was like, let's create a space like this. And which is why when I met her, I said, look, I want to play in this space. So she was like, okay, if I let you do this, will you do other work? And I said, I will do the other work if you let me do this, and blah, blah, blah. And so, it ran for 10 years as this incredible, successful, it started as an experiment. It became later on an exemplar of many things. One is what the organization of the future can look like. Is an office just a place you come to work? Is it a public space where people come to learn? This idea of surplus, we decided not to build physical infrastructure. We said, can we, in architecture, there's this term adaptive reuse. Can you reuse existing infrastructure? So we reused all the office spaces and did everything from art pop-ups to concerts to talks to, fashion shows to everything within an existing infrastructure. It became a space for the city. We played with this idea of geography. Most cities in India are delineated on colonial fault lines. So if you see any city, like the hip and happening part of the city, even today is what used to be the hip and happening part of the city many decades ago. So in South Bombay or South Delhi, etc., we completely burst that open because Vikhroli, where the lab is located, was very much considered to be suburban Mumbai. But for 10 years, it was the most hip and happening part of the city, to which hundreds, if not thousands, of people were flocking.
So it's not like a D&I event.
No,
that you
the
organize
Culture
in
Lab was
Bombay.
not a D&I event. It was a multi-year experiment which had physical events, which produced things like white papers, which conducted fellowships, which showcased voices from various fields, all of which were in their own ways examining what it means to be modern in India. So we had themes around, like for example, rural-urban circularity was one theme. Multiple Indian identities was one theme. So our programming, which was format agnostic, would be based on the intersection of some of these things. So if identities is one example, right? So queer identities might be one example, but rural-urban circularity is another. So what does it mean to be queer in rural India? I mean, there might be an event like that, right? So we did interesting programming around large questions around Indianness for 10 years in multiple ways. And we collaborated with groups like the UN, like Stanford, like so many other places over this, and we produced rich discourse. Whoever is listening, whatever role you are doing, wherever you are, you have the power. Whatever is in charge, whatever you are responsible for, grab it and use it to make a difference. So if you are an ally, I think it's very important for you to support the well-meaning, queer people, disabled people, the multiple minorities which are part of your organization, and do some of that heavy lifting.